How's it going, everyone? My name is Falling Hurts, and today I wanted to talk about something really special, and that is the Elder Scrolls IV Oblivion's remake, or potential remaster. Now, I've seen a few different people talking about it on social media, different things like that, different kind of bullet points of what's actually being said so far, and I think there's, some bad faith with some of it, so I kind of want to talk about not only everything we know from this, but also what it means for the Elder Scrolls in general, and also other franchises as well. So first off, this comes from Reddit for a gaming leak, of course, in a now since deleted post from a now since deleted user. One thing important to note, though, as we will be talking about this, is that this is from a former employee from the Virtuous Games studios. And while this leak could potentially not be true, or this leak could be fabricated, there were moderators who did kind of confirm after the fact that they were shown information, not screenshots or anything like that, but stuff that proved that they were, at least at one point, an employee of the studio. But of course, the internet being the internet, we do have a screenshot of the Reddit post, and I'll kind of go through it here and kind of talk about everything I feel like needs to be talked about. And of course, the main point of discussion. First, there is the Alter project, which is the remaster/remake of Oblivion. The discussion for it being a full-blown remake is still ongoing, or whenever they left the project that was. It is currently using a pairing system, so it means that the remaster is running both an Unreal Engine 5 project and the old Oblivion one, being of course the Gamebryo engine. For instance, new graphics are rendered in the Unreal Engine 5 project, but most of the gameplay, physics, etc. is still done in Oblivion. And focusing in on the idea, of course, for a second here, this dual engine process, using both Unreal Engine 5 for the graphics, while using the gameplay and physics engines of the original Gamebryo engine, something that a lot of people were pointing out on Twitter is that this is actually something that was used for Shadow of the Colossus remake from PS2 to PS4, and after doing some research into that, yeah, that seems pretty plausible. Another example of this, not in a remake capacity necessarily, but in the capacity of a new game coming out, is actually Stormgate, a video that I will have going out probably in the next day or two, highlighting the idea that while you're using Unreal Engine 5 for graphics and visuals, you very well can make your own game engine for gameplay. Now, the difference here is that Gamebryo was created a long time ago, and while Unreal Engine 5 is the most up-to-date, and I'm not a game developer, I can't claim to know how easy this can be, I have to assume that making a new engine today is going to work a little bit better with Unreal Engine 5 than perhaps a 2-3 decade old engine. And they basically finish out saying that it should be released by the end of next year or early 2025, depending mostly on if it's a remake or a remaster. It's mostly done in Paris, but Black Shamrock also helps with the studio for art. And while Black Shamrock as a studio isn't super important for this, it's just a part of that, studio, overhead. What is interesting is the way this works is that the game and its systems would be able to be used in the original game, whereas the actual visuals are going to be potentially completely overhauled with Unreal Engine. I think the issue of remake or remaster comes in is, do they want to change any of the game's systems on top of just the visuals? Again, take pretty much all of this with a grain of salt, and I'll get into why I think this could completely not be true in just a moment, but ultimately I think it's a really interesting thought exercise to think about the idea of an Oblivion remake in new graphics. You've got these Unreal Engine 5 little demos all the time. You've seen the one for Skyrim with the Watchtower. I'm sure there's ones for Oblivion too that I'll put on screen here. But when it comes to the visual style, I'm really not sure just how far you could really go with something like this. Seeing as how we don't know when this project would have started development, it is stated as one of the major projects. The other of which, of course, being Project Cobra, which is the remake of Metal Gear Solid 3, which personally I've never played. I'll probably just play the remake, so who knows if Virtuous is any good. But rather than just kind of thinking about the prospects of what the visuals could look like with demos and different things like that, of course it's not going to look like that in that Gamebryo engine, of course. But there were actually two things that I wanted to bring up. First of which being an old interview of Todd Howard with The Guardian. And this basically, I don't want to say completely goes against everything that we're talking about here today, but it also kind of brings into question that Bethesda Game Studios, and specifically Todd Howard, believes that older games are a game of their time. They're a product of their era. Meaning that while you can play The Elder Scrolls 3 Morrowind on the Xbox with the backwards compatibility, you don't need to remake games and change up any of their systems like that to fit with modern times, because ultimately they are just statements of their era. Now, of course, ultimately things can change. Since then, Xbox has bought Bethesda, so there's a completely change in leadership design philosophy, potentially. Now, they could want to stay hands-off completely, but the idea that Bethesda didn't necessarily want this back in 2018 makes me wonder, like, how much has things changed, whether that be under Xbox or that just be in general. Maybe they need some money before the next Elder Scrolls game, which seemingly isn't coming out until probably really late. Now, with that as a jumping off point, one thing that is super important to note is that if this game did come out, not only would it probably be exclusive to Xbox, there's a chance, because it is a game that was on other platforms, that it would make it to, like, say, PlayStation. It would make its way to Xbox Game Pass on day one, which is, of course, huge. Many more people can play an updated version of this game and experience the beauty that is the best Elder Scrolls game. Now, gloating aside, there is actually a major point of concern that I have with this. On one hand, I'm super excited that the public lens will be able to get the Elder Scrolls for Oblivion. You know, I love that idea, I'm all for it. However, my main issue isn't anything to do with the consumer ethics of remaking this game or anything like that. However, there is one major issue. Oblivion. Oblivion is a mod project created basically working for free to port Oblivion into Skyrim's game engine, which goes from Gamebryo to the creation engine. This has been a monumental task. It's basically been a thing since the early years of Skyrim's release, but as it's grown in scope and scale, of course, there's officially been a release year given, and that was 2025, so potentially the same year that this would hypothetically release if it was real. Now, legally speaking, you can't own Oblivion alone. You have to own both Skyrim and Oblivion on PC to mod this game. The workaround for this legally for the Oblivion team was that Bethesda said, hey, you have to make sure that they own a copy of Oblivion. So what they've done, and I think something that streamlined their process of developing Oblivion, is they've made it to where you can import audio files and different files like that from Oblivion directly, which also requires you to own Oblivion. So in Bethesda's eyes, and of course Oblivion's eyes, this is a completely legal project. We could be in the year of 2025 dealing with the Oblivion mashup of the Oblivion remake or remaster and Oblivion, which is basically a full-blown remake, as it were. So I'm really curious to see what the community sentiment would be in a situation like that. I feel like depending on the visuals and honestly release timings, we may see an exodus from either one of those projects to one or the other. I hope, and I mean this in all seriousness, that the Oblivion team gets the complete and utter recognition they deserve. And personally, if I have to make a choice of, they're going to be releasing around the same times, because we kind of know of Oblivion, and clearly we'll have to hear about the remake at some point if it is real, I will make the choice towards Oblivion. But really, that's it for me. I just wanted to bring up these moral conundrums and also kind of talk about the logistics of this project. I think the idea of doing dual development makes somewhat sense for why this project may not be that far off, but at the same time, it's still a little ways away, and looking at it from a remaster perspective, it could make perfect sense. So with that being said, thank you for watching. My name is Falling Hertz. Let me know what you're thinking about doing with this if it is real. Ultimately, I think Kyle over at the Oblivion team is a great dude, and I'm really excited to support that project. And if you are too, of course, go to Oblivion, check out the developer updates. Until then, goodbye.